Hi, it's Shelley Carpati, writer and host of the Spicy Soul Mama podcast and Substack. On this show, we delve into how we connect into our spiritual lives for authentic living. I am bringing authentic, sometimes raw, and compassionate conversations for insight into our universal truths and what is required to heal ourselves and the world around us. In a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming, I hope these conversations will spark curiosity and plant tiny seeds of awareness so that we might all collectively learn, grow, and remember our humanity and interconnectedness. And don't forget to find me on the Substack app to subscribe for updates at Spicy Soul Mama. Welcome to the Spicy Soul Mama podcast, Summer Koester. Summer is an award-winning writer, anthropologist, performing artivist, neurospicy mom to an autistic child, and a 20-year Alaskan teacher. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Sun, McSweeney's, Slate, Huff Post, Independent, and Electric Lit, among others, and she is a winner of the Alaska Statewide Poetry Contest and several Alaska-based writing grants. Having lived several years in Latin America and the Caribbean, she runs The Feral Stack, a community and newsletter that deeply examines Anglo-American culture, connecting behaviors and values that no longer serve us while offering up new ones that do. So, welcome to the podcast, Summer.
Thanks so much, Shelley. I feel really honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual. So, Summer and I met on Substack, which is a flourishing, supportive community of writers. And it's so interesting how we're finding our people, our fellow writers that we really connect with. And I know that when I started reading your writing, I really felt connected to you and things that you write about. So maybe we can talk first a little bit about, because we're both mothers, I would
Mm.
love to, learn a little bit about your background in, motherhood and how you have been managing, raising a child who lives with autism and finding time to be this creative artist.
Oh, wish we had more time. Thank you. Great question. I love your Substack. I mean, the spicy soul mama, that just it resonates so much with me. My life has been so spicy lately because of parenthood, especially after the pandemic. I live in I live in Juneau, Alaska, and the weather is pretty much a cold rainforest. During the pandemic, we didn't have a social bubble. I live out the road. There's no children my daughter's age, and she, like you said, she's autistic, and it was, it just felt so isolating,
Mhm.
and to the point where it changed me on the cellular level. And it comes back every time we just had school closure on Monday because of a big snowstorm. And oh, there comes my pandemic PTSD, it's still,
Yes.
and my daughter, I don't know, for those who live with autism or who have autistic family members, you can be having a great day and everything's peaceful. And then all of a sudden, something that um, the autism off or sets, you live with some autistic people live with tremendous sensitivity. And next thing I know, my daughter is screaming, and that's just
Mhm.
kind of normal for her, but it's still so jarring to the nervous system.
Yes.
And when it's inside and you can't, that's when she's dysregulated. You can't, reason with her at that point. She just needs to be regulated again, and you just have to be there for her. But it's really hard when you're stuck inside and you can't get, like, that's an outside voice, right? And it
Right.
changes all the dynamic in the family. And
Yes.
so that's something that we've been dealing with. And unfortunately, in Alaska, we have a governor who has consistently underfunded education since 2017. And every year, the class sizes are growing and growing and growing. And my daughter was in a class of 34 students last year. And for a fourth grader with autism, that's completely
Mm.
unacceptable. My mother was called in to work for free because
Mm.
there wasn't enough support. She needed
Mm-hmm.
help with transitions. We did all that, and this year, it school was such a struggle for her that I pulled her out 2 weeks ago, and now I'm homeschooling her.
Mm-hmm. In addition
So,
to
in
all your
addition,
other responsibilities. So
mhm,
maybe are there any like I mean, I know that the tools that might work for your daughter may not work for other people, other parents who are managing their children's characteristics on the spectrum. So what is there anything in particular that a tool that soothes her, that, or do you just let her have her moments until it passes?
that's a great question. The best thing I can do for her is to just sit with her in her pain, and try to empathize and listen. When she was younger, I would hold her.
Hmm.
Um, when she was screaming and crying, I would just hold her in a gentle way, not like a "you're going to calm down and I'm going to hold you
Right.
until you calm."
Yeah.
Um, and and that really helped. I would ask her first, like, "Do you want me to hold you? Can I hold you?"
Hmm.
And now that she's 10, I don't necessarily hold her, but I I try to, I feel like her outbursts are really just her standing up for her humanity, because one of her favorite things to say is it's not fair. And it's not fair. She has an older brother who gets away with more because he's older.
Hmm.
It's not fair being an autistic person in a neurotypical world. There's so many injustices,
Hmm.
and so if I can just see her and be like, yeah, you're right. It's not fair, and I'm sorry, and let's try to make it more fair. And how can we try to make it more fair? That seems to calm her down.
Yeah, so she's feeling heard, and I think that
Yeah.
what you just shared is really important. I think for parents, whether they have a neurodivergent child or not, is to hear them and see them as people and not these little, people that don't have their own needs and
Mhm.
desires. And
Yeah.
I know that. Um, when I my children were young, they're now 19 and 22. One of my children, my 22-year-old, is neurodivergent. When they were little, I remember it was kind of easy, but yet I was drinking from a fire hose, and I was working, and they were at school, and they were at the after school programs, um and then I was commuting, and just the juggling and never being able to be present with them, because it
Mhm.
was always about the schedule and the
Right.
working and the getting ready, the food and the safety and the and then bed bath and bed and bath and dinner,
Mhm.
bed, bath. And I would always be so happy when the day was over, but then I'd have to get up and do it all over
Do it
again.
all
But
over. Yeah.
however, what you and it didn't I didn't come into the present moment until my son was 14, until he had his break, um, his mental health break. And so, but what
Mhm.
I hear you saying, well, you're saying like you feel it at a cellular level. And so I think that you probably found out early on, like, that you had to be present, that you had to get in your body and drop everything and just be present in the moment with her to
Mhm.
tap into what her needs are. And you have to do that every day. And I just really want to acknowledge and admire that, because we only have today, right? And we only have this moment. And I just want to I really acknowledge that, and how much it takes so much to be in the present moment. So I just want
And
to
this is,
acknowledge you for
yeah.
that.
Thank you. It's so hard in this culture, because everything about this culture is don't be present. It's just go, 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 think about the future, get to the next, spot, go as fast as you can. That's the kind of model I grew up in. And I feel like my mom, when she was present with me, she was wonderful, but most of the time she was working. And I mean, like working, like she working outside the home and working inside the home. And when she was actually, the only time I ever saw her sit down was when she was grading papers, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was just, that's what everyone does.
Right.
And anthropologists say that time in this culture is basically a rushing river, right?
Mm.
And when you look at rushing rivers, like what's allowed to grow, really. I remember going to a place when I was 19, an island off the coast of Honduras, and experiencing time differently. The people were, talk about present, 100% present all the time. Food took hours to prepare. And I remember people being like, don't be, mad at your cook or server when your food takes 2 hours to come. And I remember being there and thinking, I'm having such a wonderful time being present. Why would I be mad that my food isn't here yet? Like, I just want to
Right.
be in this moment right now, even if it's like waiting for my food, because we're basically like in a tropical paradise.
Yes.
And a month went by, it felt like a year had gone by, because time, you're so present, it helps you when you're on vacation.
Yes.
Um, but this culture, what I'm trying to say, doesn't really allow for that. And I
Right.
have to say, like, it's really, really, really hard to give that to your children. And I don't want anyone listening to this beating themselves up thinking, oh, I should be more
Right.
present for my kids, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's no way I could do what I do if I worked full time. And I
Yeah.
do not work full time. And I am in a cishet relationship, and my husband brings in most of the money. I do provide as well, but I couldn't do it without him. And
No,
that brings in a whole other subject, about
yes. Dependency
where's the
and
autonomy,
yeah,
exactly,
exactly.
dependency, and yeah, all that. But and
Yes.
most parents with neurodivergent children, there's a study that came out that on average, parents with neurodivergent children make about less than half
Mm-hmm.
than parents with neurotypical kids, just for that reason. Like, we can't
Hmm.
get anywhere on time. It's just,
Right.
forget about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one example. Or my daughter's having, the office, we used to call me all the time and be like, ah, you need to come in.
Yeah.
And if I
Right.
was locked into a job that I couldn't, well, I do teach part-time. I'm locked into that. But
Mm-hmm.
that's part-time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have my mom that could uh, come sometimes last minute. She lives in town.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's very challenging, and it is a whole, thing in our culture of like, we're only worth if our worthiness is tied to money and
mhm,
income and stature
yeah,
and climbing the ladder, and we lose our authenticity and the truth of who we are the more that we put on these hats and these roles. And so,
right.
do you find that you're learning? Certainly you learned this while you were, what present means in so many different ways, it sounds like. Do you find that you're still learning from your daughter in this way? And what do you do to like, do you visualize, do you do any mindfulness or visualization to like, or it's just an automatic thing? How do you stay calm through all of that?
Mm. Well, first of all, I don't always stay calm. I make mistakes, but usually I'm I try to. And yeah, I mean, there's you asked if I was learning from her, like, am I inspired by her? Does she teach me, like, that kind of? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
she's like my muse. And in fact, when I named my Substack the Feral Stack, it was basically inspired by her, because
Mm. Hmm.
and we became fully feral around the pandemic. I mean, we live out the road in Alaska and didn't have a social bubble. But there was a time we even dropped, we didn't do Zooms. We just did what I called nature school, because I
Hmm.
could tell that Zoom wasn't working for either of my kids. Both of them were neurodiverse, but
Mm.
neurodivergent. But yeah. And so we went pretty feral. I wrote a piece about that for the Huffington Post, doing nature school.
Uh-huh.
And but also, like, I mean, feral has this negative connotation. I look up feral and word hippo, the thesaurus, and it's all these negative words that
Mm.
that come out as synonyms. And it's too bad in our culture that that is considered a
Yeah.
negative thing. And of course, that comes from, colonization. And like in Alaska, they had an expression, kill the Indian, save the man,
Mm.
which is a horrible, you
Yes.
know, racist thing to say, but that was their expression. up until pretty recently, we had actually the 80s, we had boarding schools here in Alaska.
Hmm.
And well,
That's,
we've lost touch of that natural side of ourselves, though, our
yeah,
culture.
yeah,
And so I think it's important to go back to that, to
I
try
agree.
to, yeah, bring in more, what is our
Yeah.
truth, right? That feral truth inside of us.
Exactly. Like I honestly, I mean, when I think of the word feral, I think of a cat. You know, usually we would
Mm-hmm.
refer to a feral cat, the ones that are wandering and free. And I think of it as, you know, living in their truth and
Yeah,
wander and being free and to explore and to find that, yeah, like you said, the authentic truth that so often we don't, um, we're not allowed to remember. And I think that
right.
you bring up a really good point and something that I've been reflecting on for a long time as well in terms of what you know, how we are going back to the elders of the Native Americans, from the Indians, and remembering that there is a whole history before 1776, and there is a
Mm-hmm.
whole history um, that existed before that date that we need to remember and learn from because we are at a very pivotal, challenging time. And look, we all come from ancestors. We all come from some place that makes up our skin tone, our bodies, but our souls are all we're all the same, but we're not allowed in this culture to remember that very easily. Um, so
Yeah,
I think
100%.
it's really important to, and what you write about all of that is it's really important. And um, how are you exploring that? So you're exploring that in your writing, and it sounds like you're merging your years of living in Latin America and the Caribbean, and then blending it to the feral stack. And you know, it sounds like you're really merging all of these
Mm-hmm.
topics, and I just love that. Is there um, how do you show the reader how like how our behaviors and values may no longer serve us, right? And how do we look at
Mm-hmm.
that and move on from that? Because I believe inherently that we are good human beings. I'd like to think so. So without bashing
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, you know, into, you know, shame,
Right,
um, but with awareness.
right. Yeah. It's yeah. So one of my favorite teachers is Bio Akamolafi, and he writes about how even the most privileged of us, being white people, and men, right, and neurotypical, are realizing that even it's not working out for even them or for even me, as a pretty, all things considered, white privileged white person. It's we're I mean, you can just look at all the statistics, right, to see that our culture is not as happy and healthy as maybe we once were or we could be.
Hmm.
And um, or what was I going to say before that? And so it's time to start looking for new teachers and learning. And I believe very strongly that Indigenous leaders, um, they have been, not to over romanticize um, Indigenous culture, but they have some lessons that we need to listen to. For example, as Alaskan schools have been incorporating a lot of Indigenous learning and curriculum and instructional techniques into our programs. And we found that when we do start bringing in culture bearers and elders and teachers, um, to teach teachers like me how to teach all of the students, everybody benefits, not just the Indigenous
Yes.
children who clearly benefit because this is bringing them back to their roots and they come from you know, their culture, like cultural genocide, right? Their wounds are very fresh,
Hmm.
but they're also closer to their roots. And I think one thing we really forget about in Anglo-American white culture is that it's not just what you can see that matters. It's also what you can't see. And one of those things, and you can see this like across the board in medicine, uh, it we have to tend to the roots. And so many white people have disconnected from our roots. I asked my mom, what are my roots when I was little? And she said, Heinz 57, you know, that's your roots. And I'm like, that's a steak sauce. Okay, I feel
And Wonder
connected. And
Bread, yes.
yay. And so, right. And so no wonder I was like looking for my, you know, myself all through my 20s, living in different cultures, trying to figure out like, who am I? What is the right way to be? Because back home, I was a social outcast, but maybe
Hmm.
there's like another way to be or another place that'll have me. And so I think that you look at the plants that grow the strongest, or they have to grow roots into the soil, right?
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
we tend to focus on the blooms here in this culture, but how do they get these big, beautiful, strong blooms? By
Right,
tending
right.
to the roots, and we've lost touch of our roots. And bioakumolaki, I'll go back to him again. He says that white people are basically orphans of a crowded sky,
Hmm.
and we are all searching for our own indigeneity. And we were all indigenous once. You know, by indigeneity he means connected to the land, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Connected to our ancestors, our roots. That's and many of us have lost touch to that. And so there's much to be learned
Yeah.
by bringing in indigenous wisdom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And while it's a kind of a complicated topic in some ways because there's also white people have their own trauma and they've inflicted trauma on each other from
Mm-hmm.
our Irish, from the Irish coming to America, Protestant and Catholic, also even Jewish people that fled pogroms and the Holocaust. And while they may be Jewish people are the majority of them that live in the States are from Europe, their roots are back to the Middle East and in the land of Judea, just as much as the indigeneity of the people of that region that live there.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I guess what's really interesting is that, we also have to look at that we've inflicted our trauma
Mm-hmm.
on each other just as much.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep repeating this cycle over and
Mm-hmm.
over. And I think that it's important to just to to have these conversations there has to be like in a safe space because people
Mm-hmm.
get very triggered around, and I hate that word because it's so violent, but I guess
Mm-hmm.
a better word is ignited around,
Mm,
just taking a look at how people um, can own it, and just see it in a safe space. And you have to be very
right,
skilled to create those conversations. So
right.
um, I think it sounds wonderful that where you live, that it's being discussed and there is more, where I live too, there's a lot of, I live on a lot of, there's a lot of reservations in the Coahuila band of Indians that are down here in Palm Springs. And the land is really divided. When you're going onto reservation land, when
Mm,
um, there's a new cultural center that I haven't had the chance to go to yet, but there's a lot of honoring here of Native people, Indigenous people. So, and you
mm,
can feel the presence. I mean, not even you can feel the unseen presence here for sure in different
mm,
places. So,
mm-hmm,
um, so then you travel the world and learn seeking. And so how is that going now? And how have you come back to yourself? And how do you identify now after all
mm.
that?
Yeah. Well, so growing up kind of neurodivergent, not having a word for it, being kind of a weirdo. My parents came from a different culture. I was like the opposite of what the right way to be in Alaska. And so I was always trying to search for a better way to be, or a place that would have me. And so then I did incorporate into my undergrad, which was People in Performing Arts of Latin America and the Caribbean, which allowed me to get credit for living abroad in cultures that were very different. Like I immersed into the dancehall reggae scene in Jamaica, and lived in Costa Rica, where I met my Venezuelan husband. And every time I was with people who didn't, I didn't share a single demographic box, essentially. I mean, socially, education, racially, culturally, like language, everything was different, but that's always what I was looking for. I was looking for something completely different. And and I did bring my ex-Venezuelan husband back to the United States, got him the fiance visa. That's why we got married. I tried to make it work for a while, um, and having experienced all these different cultures, I think really did kind of grow a new self inside of me and give me confidence to be like, even though I don't conform to any of these boxes that have been given me, it's okay. I'm okay with that. And I like being different.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned something along the way. So, and it's interesting, I did end up back in Alaska, even though I had felt kind of like rejected from it for a while,
Yeah.
but now that I was like this new self,
Mm-hmm.
I felt comfortable in I've felt like, who is it? Sophie Strand said something about becoming resilient in my otherness. And
Nice.
I love that. I'm like, yeah, my
Yeah.
otherness made me authentically myself. And
Beautiful.
so I was able to come back to Alaska and then start appreciating the wildness of it all, because it is so feral here. I mean, yes, we do live in the capital city, which is wonderful. The arts, again, feral, right? The art scene is so
Yeah.
thriving. I'm very involved in it. We have one of the top 10 cities for the arts in the nation. And that's
Mm-hmm.
based upon how much money goes into the arts per capita. So there's like
Mm.
lots of grants, and there's lots of opportunities for performing artists, fine artists, small pond, big fish, right? So you can
Nice.
do anything you want here, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's so
so that's
great.
kind of how I've reconciled it.
Yeah, it's so great that you've kind of come full circle. Isn't that, sometimes we have to, it's like wherever you go, there you are. And you just learning more, travel helps you learn so much about yourself.
Right.
And that sounds really wonderful that you came back to yourself. And so is this all that what you're writing a book about?
Yes. So that's what the book is about, right? So the universal theme is when you don't belong, right? And
Hmm.
you are othered, and you think maybe there's something wrong with you as a
Hmm.
result. And that's how I felt. And so I had to step outside my culture to see, was this the truth? Was this actually me, or was it my environment? And stepping outside of my culture, I started to realize that maybe it wasn't me that was flawed,
Hmm.
but something about my culture that wasn't squaring with me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
realizing there's other ways of being out there. And some of
Yeah.
these ways of being, we should actually start incorporating into our own behavior, because the way we are right now isn't always in our best interest, right? We
Right.
do things in this culture, like you said, we center productivity over relationship. And
Yes.
how is that in our best interest, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
taking that and then being able to realize that maybe I'm not necessarily like, I can be, I can find my truth when I am able to leave my world, right?
Yes. Yes.
And step out of that and make my own truth. And I think that is the definition of freedom, is being able to not have to conform to what everyone else is doing if it's not in our best interest, while still being able to belong, right?
Right. Right. And we all belong, and we all belong to each other, and we're all interconnected. And humans are interconnected, just like, and as well as, going back to indigenous culture,
Hmm.
remembering that we're breathing the air, giving and receiving life every minute of every day. And we can't do it without the trees and the flora, the fauna that's around us. Um, we can't eat if we're not connected to the earth. We can't do so many things if we're not connected. And so that's what I love about practicing mindfulness, is that it helps us get back into the truth of who we are. And they say that we're not
Hmm.
we are our most authentic selves until the age of 10. And
Hmm.
then we start
Hmm.
to put on, then we realize, like, oh, I'm a girl or a boy,
Right.
or I don't feel comfortable in my skin and in this way, or all of a sudden I feel weird, and all of a sudden I feel like othered. And I don't think that we necessarily do that to ourselves. It's just that our culture, that it just kind of evolves
100%.
that way. So,
Yeah. Middle schoolers, I see that with my son, and I saw this in my daughter's fifth grade class. That's when they start looking at each other,
hmm
right?
hmm
Like, oh, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden they become smaller. And the middle school, I teach middle school too. Now they're conforming, right? They're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh, I have to dress, I can only wear Nike hoodies and I have to wear Crocs for breaks. And, oh, don't act like that. And so, like,
right,
middle school brother, my son, like his younger autistic daughter, who doesn't care what people think,
right.
he like, that's why they fight so much, because it just drives him absolutely nuts. But at the same time, people like my daughter, I think, are really, this is why they're my muse, because they show us how to show up authentically,
Yes,
right?
yes,
And I
yes.
keep telling my son, like, once you get to high school, you're going to think your sister is so cool, because that's when you start, like, I don't care, right? High school, I don't
Right,
care what
right.
people think. Like, they do, but they want to pretend they don't, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Everybody's
we all
cool.
care, like, we all care what people think, but we all kind of want to act like we don't, right? We
Right.
care, but we don't. And the great thing about getting older, right, is you kind of stop caring a little less.
Yes, yes, definitely. And I remember when I was young and I was like, I can't wait until I grow up so then people will be nice again.
Mm.
And
Oh,
mature, and like
oh,
and mature and talk to each other and be authentic. Like, I can't wait till I get older. And then little did I realize it was like it took a very long time
yeah.
to find it. Some
Sometimes
people are
still through
still not.
adulthood.
Yeah,
There was
exactly.
a writer on Substack, I think his name was Aaron White. He posted an article where he found that people who, they did a study that when people were watched, they were less creative. And
Oh,
I think that's something also to learn by, because I mean, like middle schoolers, fifth graders, they're all watching each other. And now that we become less creative because we're being watched, right?
yes,
And less
yes.
authentic. And so that's another thing. But like, whereas, you see neurodivergent children often who are extremely, or adults who are extremely creative. And a lot of times that's because, like in my daughter's case, like she doesn't notice who's watching her. She doesn't watch other people. She's more,
Right, right.
autistic,
Yes.
self-absorbed. That's just the way her brain's built. And she's insanely creative. And some of my favorite performing artists are autistic as well, and
Yeah,
writers.
it is such a superpower. Like, there's just
Mm-hmm.
my daughter, we discovered that in elementary school that she has dyslexia, and it was so brilliant to uncover that, to see her brilliance, rather, is what I'm trying to say, because her spatial learning was stronger when she drew pictures. She also had
Mm-hmm.
an ear for music, like, neither what my
Mm-hmm.
husband or I have. She started singing herself to sleep, and she wrote a country music song in elementary school. And we didn't even
Oh.
listen to country music. Like, I don't even know where she got it. I mean, maybe from her after school
Mm,
program, but she got the vibration of country music, of like going to the rodeo and finding your memories and
mm.
losing your memories and having photographs, and maybe it'll come back. Like, she created this whole story. And so, and the,
Wow, that's
and the,
beautiful.
yeah, and so now she's still a singer-songwriter at 19,
Oh,
and creative beyond,
great.
and always would not allow people to tell her who she was. And
Mm,
like your children, my daughter and my son are both my muses, and where it's different for
mm,
us, that's one part of neurodivergence. Then my son, who lives with many characteristics that are from the spectrum, shut down, kind of like there's a whole internal stimuli happening all the time.
mm,
You think he's not paying attention, boy, but yes, he is.
mhm,
He hears everything. He feels everything, the energy.
mm.
And I know a lot of kids, like
Yeah,
if I'm upset about one thing, he will come into a room and he might think that I'm upset with him, and
yeah,
when it has nothing to do with him. So, it's, as I'm sure your children are, it's like being a highly sensitive person
yeah,
magnified to multitude. And we can learn so much from that. Those are
yes,
gifts.
yes. And they're also like they're cursed, right? Because they have to
Yes.
live with that. And I mean, as a highly sensitive person, I can, yeah, it's so hard. It's like when Spider-Man gets his Spidey sense and now he's like, I can't even function in the world, right? But at the
Yes.
same time, it's a superpower, but oh,
Yes.
hard
Yes.
to for them to live in a neurotypical world. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
I
when you're
relate to that.
teaching, are you able to weave in like empathy lessons and things like that to
Mm,
teach all the non-academia and how to relate to
yes.
one another? I mean, there's so much
Yeah.
pressure for teachers now, and I would think that would be
Yeah.
a big thing.
Yeah. I teach Spanish, so I can basically teach, and I teach middle school, so I don't have to follow a certain curriculum. I always try to incorporate social emotional into every. We just did a lesson, Picasso, self portraits in the style of Picasso Cubism. And so I told students to start with a feeling. Um, and I showed them Cubism and how you can have contrasting or contradictory feelings at the same time, right? And to
Yes.
basically paint that using Picasso style features. And that was one of my favorite. And the really sad thing about that was almost all of the students depicted anxiety and depression
Mm,
in their
mm.
self portraits. And I've been doing this for 10 years and it hasn't been, there's always been grief and anger, especially grief. But this time it was just like a lot of anxiety and depression
Yeah,
that showed up, which of course just is representative of everything we've been hearing, right? About how students are more
absolutely.
depressed now and anxious.
That's very
Yeah.
hard and heartbreaking. And, going back to what you were saying earlier, if we look back to indigenous cultures, everyone was equal, everyone is equal. Women have positions of power, and they
Mm-hmm.
are equal, and seen and revered as the nurturers. I mean, even if we
Right.
look back at the paintings of Gauguin, who visited the Caribbean and depicted, people that didn't feel, I think it was people that felt like their gender was not right in their bodies. They didn't feel right in their body. They were revered
Yes.
as mystical,
Two
intelligent, deeply
spirit.
aware, two
Mm-hmm.
spirit. Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, again, I agree. Like we have to go back to this relational, world where we see one another and
Mm-hmm.
we witness one another, and we're, the word inclusivity is used so much, but I just really have a problem putting all these labels on things. And
Mm-hmm.
because I just want to go back to just, let's just be humankind. Let's
Right.
be humankind and
Yes.
to one another.
Let's
Because,
find the time and the space to remember what that feels like, right?
right,
But
right.
that's the part of the rushing river.
Yes, yes.
No time for that. And
Yeah,
that's how
exactly.
they want
Yeah.
it.
Well, then you have people that are living like, you get to, you live, I mean, it doesn't matter where you live, because we could go to live in Alaska and try to slow things down, and it's still the case. We could go, like I
It's
moved
still
from,
capitalism.
it follows us, right? We can't, I don't know
Hmm.
where,
Yeah.
so I hope we can create small communities with mom and pop shops again, and just
Hmm.
slowing down and seeing one another. I thought that would happen with the pandemic. It
Yeah.
happened for a little
Yeah.
while,
Right.
but here we are back again.
Yeah. I
So,
know. I thought we were learning our lesson with the pandemic as well. And We did.
Yeah.
It just went
Yeah.
back to the way it was.
I
I was
know.
just,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I was just sharing an article, the one that just came out. It was a New York Times or something. I don't know. My AirPods are about to die. Let me know if you can't hear me, and I'll just
Okay.
go to. Oh, I think. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. They just died, even though they were fully charged. It was an article about uh, what did they call it? Communal living. There was like
Oh,
200
yeah.
communal living spaces in this country so far where multiple families, or maybe not multiple families, maybe it's just extended families. I didn't read the whole article. I just read the social media post. Get together and buy some, buy a multiplex, and then
Hmm.
they help each other out collectively, just like our ancestors did, or just like the Clinkets and the Tsimshian, on whose land I live right now,
Hmm.
did, because it's unrealistic to think. I mean, this nuclear family model, right? The parents are
Yeah.
supposed to do this and this and this and this and like everything, right?
Right.
And asking my mom and sister, like, can we please just buy a can we go back to this, please? That would be Roz cooks, I'll clean, someone
Right.
helps me watch the kids, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, it would be really nice to be able to go back to that, but unfortunately, our society won't necessarily allow us.
But they
But
are, but their people are establishing some of these
yeah,
collective learning.
good. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And I am seeing more of that also, like with aging, like people
Hmm.
mindfully buying,
Yeah.
communities together and doing it differently. Because I think we've learned a lot from like from, the communes of the 60s, how those always like kind of went a lot of those went dark and fell apart. But so that's human nature. Yeah, I just always think of that Wild Wild Country, the Osho story. I don't know if you know that story, but you have to check it out sometime from the 60s. It was this
That's not the one
community.
where there was a killer, right?
There always seems to be one in the end, right?
Yeah, a cult.
So
We're talking about
right.
cults now.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what it's like. It's natural human evolution that there's, if you live together, there has to be a leader. It's like it becomes a Lord of the Flies thing, or
Right.
like it's so funny. But anyway, human nature is very interesting in that way. But
And
so
that's why the Clinkets were matriarchal. The
oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. Nice, nice. Maybe
Just saying.
someday. Yeah. Well, one of my favorite books ever that I read like over 20 years ago was Mists of Avalon. And that's when women were the revered and the,
Mhm.
pagans and that
Oh
whole
yeah,
society. So
I
that
love
was
that
really,
book.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was amazing.
Hmm.
Um, so you are working on this book and um, where should people like connect with you? Where would be the best place for them to read your writing and have these kinds of cool conversations with you on Substack?
Yeah, just go to Substack and Google the Feral Stack. That should pop